Hello and welcome to Love Your Job, Love Your Life podcast. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Fran Williams. Welcome to the podcast, Fran.
Thank you, James. Thanks for having me.
So, very quick introduction to Fran. Fran is the head of people for Playtonics. Playtonics are a video game studio. So they create video games, which is all very exciting. And I just found out that Fran is the only person that works in the business that doesn't play video games, which is an interesting fact. But also, alongside that, Fran has also set up her own business and is the founder of a company called Wellgood. And that's going to form part of our discussion today, actually, which will be really interesting. So before we jump into that, and I start asking you some questions, Fran, do you just want to give a very quick intro into what Wellgood does?
Yes, of course. And I just wanted to say, with regards to not being a gamer, for those that are watching this and are into video games, the good thing about it is the fact that I'm there to look after the people. So the fact that I'm not a gamer isn't a bad thing. It's the fact that I'm there for the people. So I just wanted to put that out there. And I'm a great tester because I'm not used to playing games. So I'm a good video games tester. So the side hustle that I created with regards to Wellgood, I actually set up 18 months ago after a really challenging time 5 years ago. And Wellgood's all about empowering young people to believe they can achieve anything if they focus on their mindset, they're willing to keep learning. And for me, they always operate with kindness. So it's basically a website that I wanted young people to be able to go to. So it's not just for parents and carers and teachers, which a lot of the sites are for. And I wanted it to be not just focused on mental health, but to be focused with lots of different aspects of well-being, whether or not that's physical, mental, nutritional, financial, you name it. And as part of that, I then created what's called the Calmness Crew brand. And that's all about getting these techniques that we know mental health professionals use to help young people when they deal with anxiety, stress, worry, panic, overwhelm, and actually create tools that children can physically use to actually make them kind of manage their emotions in the best way that they can. So say, for example, the Calmness Crew plushie is here. It's weighted to £3, so 1.2 kilos. And if you press the back, it's got a device in it that guides through a breathing technique, positive affirmations, and a grounding technique. And their mental health professionals use them when they're dealing with young people with mental health challenges. And then on the front, you probably can see the different emojis and the initials. So these are just badges that young people can then personalise their plushie with. Because different feedback that I got from young people was that sometimes to actually talk about how they're feeling can sometimes be quite hard. And I think even adults, if they've not been used to it, can then find it hard to talk and open up. So then I thought, well, is there a way that we could use emojis? Everyone knows emojis now with regards to if they've got iPads or phones. So what it means is that if they have the emojis, if they're feeling a certain way, if they're feeling tired, if they're feeling angry, they can put that emoji on and it might spark that conversation with their parent, their teacher, for them to then go, why have you got the angry emoji on there? Yeah. What are you thinking about? And it just hopefully then sparks those conversations, because for me, it's a case of all of these emotions are normal. It's like they're there to protect us. But actually, it's when these emotions can take over at times that we're either safe or we don't really need to be feeling that extent of that emotion. So again, it's kind of normalizing these things, but then giving people the tools that if they are starting to feel a bit overwhelmed by it all, what they can put into place. And if you can get these techniques into people at a younger age, by the time they get to teens and adulthood, it's just going to become second nature to them to know what the right thing to do is. So that's Wellgood. I've probably gone on way too. You probably wanted like a 20-second.
No, it's fine. It's brilliant. And look, that's going to form. I know that's going to form kind of the core of what we're going to talk about today on this podcast. And it's going to be there to sort of help us to discuss the impact almost that is bringing through into the workplace, because we know you mentioned 5 years ago, and I'll come back to that in a second. But you're right in actually, as adults, and someone that, and I'm talking from my own personal experience as someone that's been in the workplace for over 20 years, we don't openly talk about this stuff. And there is no easy way and there's no easy solution for other than me openly verbalizing it and talking about it with somebody, that to show somebody. I love the emoji thing because it's almost like, do you know what? I'm feeling a bit down today. And that's why I developed the model that I developed with Engage to Succeed. I'm on a bit of a roller coaster today. So it's like, if people know that, they then know how I'm feeling, what kind of emotions I might be feeling, how they might approach a conversation with me, etc. And that's the important thing here, isn't it? It's about saying, this is how I'm feeling. And actually, by making somebody aware of that, they can then change their behavior or their approach to it to make sure that they're not tipping, I would say tipping that person. And over the edge is quite a dramatic statement, Fran, but it's true. If I'm feeling a bit anxious or I'm not having a great morning and someone kind of says, oh, look, can you redo this piece of work for me because it's not what I wanted?
Yeah.
That's enough to make me go, actually, do you know what? I've gone from a roller coaster to stuck because I wasn't expecting that. So it's I love the fact you've got that on there. And obviously, who doesn't love a cuddly toy, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing that kind of prompted me was like my children, I've got 2 children, and their beds are covered in cuddly toys. Yeah. And when they're feeling worried or sad or anything like that, they grab one of the cuddly toys. But then I would be the person that would have to do any of the techniques with them. And I was thinking, hang on a minute, how come the plushies, they're great and they look great and they feel great, but actually none of them are actually guiding to actually physically help how a child can feel. So I do rate plushes.
Brilliant. Look, so look, we've started this off, and other than ask you to introduce, we've not really got into any meaty questions, but clearly anyone watching, and we've talked a few times, Fran, can see that you have huge passion for this stuff. Why, and working in essence a full-time job and deciding to create a side hustle, no undertaking. I gave up my full-time job to set up Engage to Succeed. So, why did you decide to follow this passion? Because that is something that, lots of people don't necessarily do. So why is it you decide to follow this passion?
So my passion, I would say my passion is people generally. So being in HR, and when I got offered the job as head of people at Playtonic, it was brilliant. Absolutely loved the opportunity. They were growing, and it was kind of a great opportunity to start from the bottom, introduce like HR systems, culture, and kind of really develop the people. And then after a year, I was really focused. I can't remember at what point. I don't know if it was actually Mental Health Awareness Week, and I just kind of was really kind of thinking about, I think somebody broached the question of kind of mental health and what does mental health mean to you? And it kind of got me thinking. And that's when I was like, crikey, like 5 years ago when we came out of lockdown, I went through the most challenging experience as a parent where I felt completely helpless. I was crying probably every night when the kids were in bed because I felt as though I was failing them, in the sense of when we came out of lockdown, we were reversing off the drive, and it reared its head in our daughter by the fact of we were about to go on a long car journey to visit family that we would normally do every month, to go visit family that lived further away. And we were reversing off the drive, and she just jumped out the car, went running inside, screaming, having this panic attack. And me and my husband and my little boy were kind of like, what on earth is the matter? Went inside, and then that was the start of this journey that we went on, where every night she'd be feeling sick, having a panic attack, she'd be over the toilet, she couldn't go to school, she couldn't leave the house, we'd normally, like in lockdown, we were going for the daily walks around the block. It got to the point where she'd be holding onto the garden fence as we're then like trying to say like, let's just go for a walk, literally like nothing I've ever witnessed. And I talk about, you can get emotional thinking about it, because as a parent, your child breaks their leg or injures themselves, you can take them to hospital, you can clearly see what they need to do to as if fix them. Mental health, you can't get into your child's head. And as a parent, that's the scariest thing, because you can see them having a panic attack, but you're trying to say to them, tell me what you're thinking about, that's what's causing you to feel sick, because what you're thinking about is then kind of how you're feeling. And so then it was lots of talking, and like I said, she'd be grabbing a cuddly toy, and then we were reading books, we were listening to podcasts. I reached out to a therapist because I had some people saying you should just take them in the car kicking and screaming and force them to do it. I then was like, that doesn't feel right to me. I don't want to cause a lifelong trauma. Then I had other people saying, oh yeah, just let them stay at home. Like, they need to get used to it. But then I was like, well, that doesn't feel right, because to me, that was as if saying, well, that's showing them that it isn't safe outside and that they're right to feel that way. So it's getting that balance. So I remember speaking to a child therapist, just myself, not my daughter didn't go, and just said to them, this is what I'm doing as a parent. I don't know the right thing, but I just need some guidance to know which route is the best route. And thankfully they said, continue to do what you're doing. So it's just tiny steps, and it's a case of not letting them go out, but just doing little bits at a time. And then having these techniques, having these things that I can go into more detail on, as well as everything else. So it's not like a one size fits all and just one thing would work. There was lots of things. And even to the extent of, I then started reading and researching about positive energy within the house. So I like feng shui. And one day my husband came downstairs and was like, I didn't realise we'd moved to the Amazon rainforest, because I bought all these indoor plants, essential oils in diffusers, crystals. I literally, anything that I could think of, I was trying. And thankfully now, when I look back at that time and to now, like coming out of it all, my daughter afterwards joined an artistic team where she'd be training 9 hours a week, half an hour away, 3 times a week, where we'd have to drive half an hour. She'd do 3 hours of gymnastics. She'd drive half an hour back. She's head girl at her primary school. She goes to secondary school in September, and she's actually picked a secondary school where none of her friends are going. And it's because
brilliant.
That's where she feels most comfortable when she went to look round. So as a parent, I was there, like, you're like, hang on a minute. If my daughter had extreme anxiety where she couldn't physically leave the house or do anything to get to the point of where she is now, I am a huge believer that anybody can do that. And people just, we call it as if it unlocked this inner power within her. So even though you don't want your 6-year-old to be going through that, and at the time I'd have done anything to stop her from going through it, in a way that experience, it taught me, my husband, my little boy, my daughter, that now, say for example, with anything, so we go swimming or to clip and climb, and if they're scared to put their head in the water, you'd say things like, is that your mind telling you you can't do it? Or there was a great book that we also loved, which was by Professor Steve Peters, My Hidden Chimp, which is based on the chimp paradox. And it talks about your hidden chimp that tries to stop you from doing things. And we'll say things like that. Is it your mind or is it your chimp? Like, and straight away now they'll go, oh yeah, like my mum's there, I'm safe. I've got no reason to not want to put my head in. I'm going to put my head in, or I'm attached to the rope. I'm safe. I can climb to the top of the wall because the chimp's trying to stop me, but I'm actually... So it's given us these tools that kind of, we realise now that there are these things to try and protect us, but actually they try and protect us at times when we're actually safe. So again, with regards to like the plushes and things, and on the Wellgood website, I created like an A to Z guide, a daily journal, because even things like when my daughter was going through the panic, the first thing we'd have to do was the breathing technique, which is the first thing that's in the plushie, because once you kind of have got your breathing under control, you're sending that signal to your brain to say actually, I'm safe. You're doing the right breathing technique. Then going into the positive affirmations, because if you're saying to yourself you feel a certain way, your brain sometimes doesn't know if you're telling the truth or not. So the positive affirmations are so good. And then the grounding technique for if you are starting to panic, that regaining of control because you're focusing your mind on other things. So those things, and then like at the end of the day, like we'll get my daughter and my little boy to fill in their daily journal, because it's so easy to sometimes think about your day, even as adults, and be like, oh, I've had a really rubbish day. And actually, when you look at it, if you were actually to focus on things like, I woke up this morning, I managed to walk in sunlight, I managed to have a good meal, I had fresh water, I was able to, like the things that we take for granted are actually some of the most important things that if we didn't have, they'd affect us the most. So trying to get our kids into the habit of that feeling of looking for the positives where you can, and all of those things and everything that I've talked about, just that's what we try to then incorporate into the Well Good brand. And that's why I'm so passionate about it, is because, again, I feel as though any child or any parent that's going through this and they feel helpless, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And it does take time, it does take consistency, and it doesn't mean as well that you kind of sort it once, you can then forget about it. It's a case of this ongoing, you need to make sure you do your exercise, you do your techniques, you do your gratitude, you do your mindfulness. Like, these are all things that we need to do consistently to stay in that frame of mind. So that's where my passion comes from, and the personal reason behind why
it's
I
lovely.
set it up.
And look, it's a personal story that I've heard multiple times. You know, when I think about, my kids were older than yours, so mine were in secondary school when 2020 hit.
Yes, yeah.
And you know, they were my son was in secondary school, my daughter was in primary school, but it was a massive, like, he lost the first 2 years of secondary school because of what happened. And luckily, I didn't have the same issues as you had, but I know there were hundreds of families out there that struggled with exactly the same reason. And as parents, often, and this is what I love about what you're doing, Fran, as parents, we try and solve it for the child. But what you're doing with the plushie is actually giving the child a tool to help them solve it for themselves.
Yes,
because and that is the most important part for me, is, you know, we can advise and we can support and we can try and help them, but ultimately they also need to go through that journey themselves and solution it for themselves.
Definitely.
And that's not just children, that's also people as they grow up and in the workplace. And, you know, I talk about engagement at work.
Yes.
You know, an organization can't send somebody that is disengaged on a training course and expect them to come back engaged. The only person that can truly engage themselves is themselves.
Definitely.
And it's the same kind of scenario. So, I mean, it's a tough story to tell, because I can only imagine what you went through when you were going through it. But it's almost a beautiful outcome that's given you that drive and passion.
Definitely.
To go and help other people to do the same thing.
Definitely. And even now, like, the plushies, they've only been on sale, is it 3-4 weeks now? And some of the feedback, I've had one parent, like multiple parents contact me, but I had this one parent tell me their child has autism and they've got this brilliant brain that they hear something once and they've got it. And she said that her little boy was in the bathroom having a bit of a moment, and straight away he went into the other room, got the plushie, like the Calmness Crew plushie, and was like, I know what I need to do now, and started the breathing himself.
Wow.
And when you hear stories like that, exactly what you were saying, that the parent didn't even need to say, this is what you need to do. And he's only 5. He was 5.
Oh, wow.
And you're like, how did a 5-year-old know to? But because he'd seen on my website, I've got a video of it, the plushie being used, and he remembered seeing the plushie being used, and I'd met with them that day to give them the plushie, and then in the evening, and that's what kind of why the lady contacted me, because she was like, already he just knows what to do, and yeah, and it's when you hear stories like that that you're like, because don't get me wrong, it's been tough. I'm still in debt from it. I'll probably be in debt for a while until I manage to cover it. But when you hear stories like that, that's what makes me go, that's why I've done it.
That's why I'm doing it.
And that's it, and it's worth it just for that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And look, I suppose, and we could talk about this topic for ages, because I do a lot of breath work myself, and I know how breathing helps regulate the nervous system. And when you go into panic, or you go into anger, or fight and flight mode, or whatever you want to call it, all it is, it's a dysregulation of your nervous system. And the way that you bring that back in simple ways is exactly what the plushie does, which is simple breathing techniques help you to re-regulate your nervous system. That means that you don't go into those modes, or you come out of those modes. And it's fascinating. And I use it before a meeting. I'll openly sit there and admit it. Before I go into a big meeting, I will do some breathing techniques to make sure I calm my nervous system down. So when I go into that meeting, I'm on top form. And it's slowly becoming more and more popular in the what I would call the corporate world as well. I think where we're struggling, as you will playing into this arena, Fran, I think where we are struggling is the education sector. That actually, do we need to do more around this, mental health, well-being within the education sector, to help the younger generation understand how they can overcome some of these challenges? And which kind of leads on to kind of where I wanted to go with this is, look, we're talking about your young children. You've just mentioned a 5-year-old boy. We're now in the position where we've got people that suffered in the education system during 2020. My son being one, who's now 17 and who's entering the workforce. And, you work in the video game sector. So I would imagine, and this is a huge assumption, Fran, and tell me that I'm wrong, but, that's where a lot of the younger generation want to go. So how do you see, and this is probably putting your head of people hat on rather than your other hat on, but how does all this translate into the workforce? And actually, do we need to be thinking differently about how we translate and help people to transition and integrate better? What are your thoughts on that, especially when you consider kind of what the younger generation have been through over the last 5 years, which has been tough? Adults have struggled.
I think when I first started Playtonic, because it was 2022, because I've been there 3 years now. So it's been a couple of years since the actual first lockdown happened. And I must admit, there was a lot of people that didn't want to return to work at all. And even though they were used to going back to the office 5 days, they just didn't want to go on public transport. They didn't want to come into the office. There was this real heightened anxiety around it. So my job initially, kind of in those first few months, was kind of supporting the people where they were feeling that way, to try and understand exactly what their concerns were, why they were feeling a certain way. And instead of, we could have just gone down, you're contracted to do it, so you come in. But we didn't. We kind of said, okay, what are the things that you're concerned about? And it was a case of, like, for a period of time, doing like a workplace reasonable adjustment for them, to kind of say, okay, this person isn't feeling the same as everybody else. What can we do for that individual to make them feel kind of more comfortable? And that's what we kind of, we see everybody as individuals, and we slowly then supported it. But again, with what I learned from my daughter, I knew for a fact that I shouldn't go, okay, you stay fully remote forever, because that isn't that for me, that isn't the right thing, and that's not how you're going to help that individual. So for me, it was a case of, okay, if we can make as much of the area and everything that's in our control safe, then again, if you could get a car share, so instead of going on public transport, you're getting a car. So there was loads of things that we did. And then what's brilliant is then when they had come into work, they then would message me afterwards saying, I really didn't want to come in, but I'm so pleased that you encouraged us, because now I miss the social aspect. I missed what it felt like being in an office. And I'm so pleased that we now do it. So again, sometimes people feel they know what's right for them, but also at times, if they do push themselves out of that comfort zone a little bit, it's not going too much, but actually they'll feel so much better for doing it. And I think for younger people in the workplace now, it is that kind of focusing on mindset and focusing on kind of with regards to mental health. I think there is a part with regards to resilience that I think needs to be talked about a bit more, because I would say that I've had experiences where a decision doesn't go someone's way, or there's a slight difference of opinions, which are all normal, like in relationships, in personal lives, workplaces. You're not going to agree with everything anyone says. You're going to take things in a different way depending on how you're feeling. So you've always got different lenses on depending on what you're feeling. They're going to have different lenses on with what they're going on. And sometimes there is that difference of opinion. And I've then seen people then take mental health leave because of that. And so, again, as head of people, I feel it's my obligation to kind of have some honest conversations to say, okay, you felt like you needed to take mental health leave. Having that period of time, did it help? Or actually, would it have been better to talk about it sooner and take action? Because what you then, and the feedback that you then get is, you can have things that go on for weeks and they don't feel better mentally, but then once they then have the conversations, they talk it through, they resolve it, they then feel better. And so for me, it's a case of having those open conversations and not being scared, because I think as soon as somebody mentions mental health at times, it can be like, oh, they're mentioning mental health, whereas I'm like, we all have things that can trigger us. We can all have things that can kind of, like how you mentioned on your roller coaster, can like, is it take you to another level. I actually at work created something for new starters, and quite a few of them are of the younger generation, excuse me, and I called it the plunge of positivity. And I said to them, like on their first days and things, I was like, you're going to feel so excited, like this is your first job. You've come out of university where you've been kind of working from being at home whilst at university a lot. You've now come into the world of work. You're in video games, which you've said is your ultimate dream job. And you're going to be on the high of positivity. I said, no doubt, because this is your first job, we've got boundaries, we've got policies, we've got expectations. That plunge of positivity is probably going to start, but what then can you do to stop it? So do you reach out and ask for a mentor? Do you read a bit more about your job? Is there additional course that you could have done? Is there stuff that you can work on with your mindset? So again, saying to these young people that, again, these emotions are normal, you're going to feel these ways, but how do we then help you to manage them? And we have something called like a wellness action plan. So if anybody mentions that they're feeling a certain way, or they've had time off for mental health or anything like that, I personally, if I was a manager, I'd get all my staff to fill one in anyway, even if they've not had time off, even if they've not, because for me, having a wellness action plan for all your team, which tells them what helps them be their best at work, what could trigger them to kind of not be their best, so it really highlights and gives you a real overview of that person. Like for me, if my studio director basically said, right, I want you to do a presentation in 10 minutes on this topic, if he did that to me on a daily basis, I would be a nervous wreck. I just know I would, because I like to be prepared, I like to be organised. So again, if in the workplace, managers and kind of leaders can understand that people are different, and just because one person off the fly can present and be comfortable doing it doesn't mean that everybody else can. So get to know your people, get to know how they work at their best, and work with that. And that's something that, again, with the younger generation, I think being brave enough and open enough to share that with the managers, I think is really, really key as well.
Yeah. And it's music to my ears, Fran, because I've been talking about this for years, to say actually everybody is different, and what
Yeah,
motivates one doesn't motivate another.
yeah,
Um, and it's really important that you understand what motivates and drives people, because one person might just be motivated by and I'm going to use old hours here, starting at 9 and finishing at 5.
yes,
And
yeah,
if that's the case, if you give them something at 4:45 and it's going to take them an hour to do it, you're disengaging them. So
yeah,
it's about understanding people. And not everyone wants to be the next CEO. Some people just want to come in and do a great job and
exactly.
go home.
Yes, and you need
Um,
those people as
and you
well.
need that, yeah, totally. But it's the other thing that's really, really important. You mentioned the roller coaster. Whenever I talk to people that are struggling, and struggling, whether that be from a well-being perspective, a mental health perspective, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah,
The first sign of struggle is when they hit the top of that roller coaster.
yeah,
And very rarely do people say, I've hit the roller coaster, here's the reason why I've hit it, and this is what I need to change to go back to flying high. What they
yeah,
tend to do is they tend to say nothing, and
yeah,
they roll around on it
yeah,
for a while. And if they roll around on it for a while, they end up, as you said, they roll off it and they go down to stuck in a rut.
yes,
And that's where it becomes, most people that are struggling, well-being, mental health, work, performance, it doesn't really matter what it is. Those that are struggling are there because they haven't openly shared that they are struggling, or somebody
yes,
hasn't spotted it.
yeah,
And whether it's the spiral, whether it's the roller coaster, whether it's the plunge of positivity, it doesn't
yeah,
really matter. But it's about when you know you're hitting it, speak out,
yeah,
and
definitely,
that's the key. Um,
definitely.
so look, Fran, we've talked for half an hour already. We go on for hours. I've got a couple of quick final questions though for you,
Yeah,
because you've already given some advice around what organizations could do. Create an environment that helps people to be open when they're struggling.
yeah,
We've talked about the education sector, and the education sector and transitioning is another huge topic. But
yeah.
when you think about what you're doing outside of Playtonics,
Yeah.
is there anything else that we could be doing, or that we should be doing, or that to help people with that transition? Because I mentioned, you know, and the education system doesn't really talk about mental health or well-being or people that are struggling. But what else, if there is anything else that could we do that's really important, that needs to shift and change to help, whether it be kids, whether it be the children that are transitioning into workplace, or even workplace people?
Um, I suppose just the things that I've learned, because I'm patron at our local Burton and South Derbyshire College. So I go in and we do things like mock interviews and talk to these young people that are in the later stages of college, ready to go into the workplace. And when you're talking to them, I had a conversation with one lad, and he was on what was called their Kickstarter course. And it was like anyone that had got kicked out of school or anything like that, their last option really was this Kickstarter course. And they had to pass it and do this mock interview. And for example, I'd ask the question of, what do you want? Where do you want to see yourself in 5 years? And he said, well, I want to be successful. And I was like, well, what does success look like? And he said, well, I want a flash car and a big house. And I said, well, do you think that will make you happy? Is that what you think? And he just looked at me and he said, can you ask me the question again? And I was like, yeah. And I said, what do you want to see yourself in 5 years' time? And he said, I want to look in the mirror and be proud to be me.
Wow.
And for me, I was like, tears in my eyes. And I was like, I think that's another aspect of young people, and giving them this kind of ability to talk and really get to know what they value. And because one of the other questions was, what's your biggest achievement? And he said, well, I've not achieved anything. I've failed every exam. I've not done anything. I've been kicked out of every school. And I'm not being funny at the time. I was like, oh my gosh, what do I say to this? And then I said, have you got a best friend? And he said, well, yeah. I said, well, a best friend that you've had for years, that will have taken compromise. Like, that would have taken kind of resilience to stay with that best friend and kind of work at things, because no doubt you didn't agree on everything. And then he looked at me and he said, can you ask me the question again? And I was like, okay. He said, my greatest achievement is sorting out my own mental health last year, and his mum had committed suicide. No. And I literally, my eyes, and I just put out my hand to him and I gripped his hand. It must have looked really weird because I was literally holding on to this 16-year-old's hand, must have been for about 2 minutes. And I just said to him, I said, do never, ever, ever say to anybody that you've never achieved anything in your life. I said, you sorting out your mental health under those circumstances, I said, is the greatest achievement of your life. It gets me emotional thinking about it now, to be honest.
Yeah.
But again, as a 16-year-old, to think he's never achieved anything, but he'd lost his mum under the most awful circumstances. He then had to move in with his sister. So again, for me, with these young people that are going through things that we have no idea that they're going through, and we're labelling success as the flash car and the big house, and achievements as passing your exams. Well, I say to my kids, yes, I want you to try your best at work and at school. And yes, if you can do as best as you can in your exams, for me, your happiness, being kind to others, like, they are what will make mum and dad happy. And again, having this, these chats, and if there's people that are in the workplace that have got a spare hour, 2 hours, that they could reach out to their local college and say, do you want me to do some mock interviews with your young people? Because again, sometimes I think it takes outside people, a bit like sometimes children, when their parents saying something to them, they don't necessarily listen as much. But when it's somebody remotely and kind of somebody from an organisation, because this lad also was saying that it was because of he's from this area that he was brought up in. It happened to be the area that I was brought up in. So I said to him, I said, just because you're from there, I said, I was brought up there. And he said, no, you weren't. No, you weren't. I was like, yes, I was. And I was like, don't let where you're from, your background, your kind of your religion, don't let anything limit what you can achieve. I said, because if you focus on your mindset, if you work at some of the things that we're talking about, and at the time, I didn't have the Wellgood site set up to say, if you want to feel in this way, have a look on this website, because I've got chats on there with inspirational people that have come from nothing to achieve the most amazing things. I said, go on that website now. So then I was able to go back to the college the following year, and this lad, bless him, had passed the course. He'd then gone on to being a mechanic, and at the time, he was just flying, and he went from kicking off downstairs before coming into the mock interview with me because he really didn't want to have to do it, to then being like a star college student. And then I was able to give him the Wellgood, because his quote's in my book, like I put his quote in my book, and I gave him like loads of the Wellgood stuff and said, can you pass it on to him? And so again, for me, it's a case of giving these tools to people, because you might think that they've got no hope. You might think that they're kicking off or their attitude isn't great, but actually there's probably a reason for it. And if you just give them this hope and you spend some time with them, they could unlock their inner power. And it just takes somebody to kind of spend that time and guide them a little bit to help them.
Yeah. And it's so true. It comes back to this open communication piece, doesn't it? Society puts people in boxes, and
Yes.
and you say, oh, you live here, therefore you have no hope, or you don't have a degree, so you can't get here, or whatever it might be. So
Yeah.
mentally, we pigeonhole people,
Yeah.
and psychologically, we don't realize the effect that has on them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yet when you find or you ask that question and you have someone that takes the time to unlock their thinking and say, actually, do you know what? Let's think about this differently. Let's reframe it. Let's understand the why, and it has huge impact. So yeah, I love that, Fran. If you're listening to this and you have a spare hour or two, then maybe connect with your local college or school and see if you can help. And that is on my list to do, Fran. So if nothing else, you've encouraged one other person to do that, which is me. Brilliant. Look, we could talk, as I said before, we could talk about this stuff for hours. We've been a little bit all over the place, from work to education, and back to work, and then back to education. What I'd like to do, though, is just to close this off, Fran, is what you're doing both at Playtonics, amazing, in helping people to come in and transition, and some of the stuff that you're doing from a workplace is just brilliant, and it's music to my ears, because that's what I love to hear. So I'm guessing if anyone wants to connect with you to talk about your head of people role and what you're doing at Playtonics, I'll put your LinkedIn profile below in the comments, so then they can link in with you. More importantly, though, you know, your Well Good business and your plushies. How can people find that? How can people connect? And clearly they can connect with you through LinkedIn, and you can share it. But, you know, is there any other means that they can connect, or a website link that we'll put it in comments? But, you know, how can people find out more about this stuff?
So if they go to www.wellgood.life, that's kind of the hub of everything. So you can find out the free resources. So, for example, people can download these PDFs. It's not obviously in this format, but it looks like this if they've got the paper to print it off. There's loads of free resources on there. There's the link to the Calmness Crew plushies. There's also, I got an animation done that you can then see on YouTube. So if you go onto YouTube and search the Calmness Crew anxiety plushie, there's a video on there that you can show. And yeah, on Instagram, I'm on there, Facebook. Feel free to reach out. I always love hearing stories of people that have kind of come through challenging times. So feel free to connect.
Brilliant. And what I'll do is I'll put all of that in the overview of the podcast as well, so it's easy for people to click through. Fran, this has been wonderful. I can't believe we've been talking for so long, but it's something that's...
I'm sorry, I blab on.
It's fine. It's something that's close to my heart, because you know, I think we do need to do more. When we think about that younger generation coming through, we need to do more to help them. It's, you know, the transition to work today, in my view, is much harder than it was 20 plus years ago when I did it. And there is so much social pressure from all sorts of different places, which is a whole other topic that we know about, that's influencing people as well. So hopefully everyone has found this interesting. I would urge everyone that's listening to look at the links below to connect with Fran, and also to go and speak to their college or their school and see if there is anything that they can give some of their time up to help the younger generation with this transition out of education into work. But Fran, thank you very much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have.
It's been brilliant. Yeah, thanks ever so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. It's brilliant that you've got this podcast and people can share. So yeah, thank you for having me.
No problem. Thank you for listening all, and thanks again, Fran.